Good afternoon and welcome. I am Chioma Ajem, Senior Manager of Education at ASA, and I'll be producing this afternoon's event, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in the Staffing Industry, Insights from Industry Leaders and Data from the Field. Today's program is sponsored by ClearlyRated, headquartered in Portland, Oregon. ClearlyRated is a team of people who believe it's good business for business service providers to place the client experience at the heart of their growth strategy. ClearlyRated's popular Best of Staffing program turns actionable client and talent satisfaction surveys into credible online ratings and testimonials, recognizing the top firms on ClearlyRated.com. So to learn more about ClearlyRated, please visit ClearlyRated.com. Today's program qualifies for 1 CE hour if you're ASA certified and 1 PDC if you're SHRM certified. You can access today's handouts by visiting learn.americanstaffing.net and click on your My ASA Learn. So that's where all of our handouts in the new on-demand process. So we have a new platform, so our on-demand recordings, our handouts, additional resources, and other courses and event recordings will now be on ASA Learn. So you can download those handouts today and follow along by clicking on My ASA Learn at learn.americanstaffing.net. Today's program will be recorded and available on demand within 1 business day by visiting americanstaffing.net or going directly to learn.americanstaffing.net. I'm going to say it a lot of times, so you will know it by the end of this program. All right, so let's just jump right in. I'm happy to introduce our presenter, our facilitator for today, Eric Gregg. A lot of you already know Eric, but for those of you who are brand new to our webinars program or any other ASA programs, I'm going to introduce Eric for you. With nearly 15 years of research experience in the staffing and recruiting space, Gregg and his team at ClearlyRated, formerly Innovero, have analyzed more than 5 million surveys with the goal of determining what drives success for staffing and recruiting firms. Gregg has served as an adjunct faculty member in Portland State University's marketing program and has published numerous articles, business cases, and technical notes in the field of marketing, client loyalty, and employee satisfaction. His research and consulting have been featured in articles and as a noted industry speaker. Eric, we're delighted to have you with us again this afternoon. The show is yours.
Thank you, Chioma. What a stark contrast, this innocent-looking Eric that's on the screen there versus the Eric that you see before you today, grizzled by 2020, but super, super excited to be able to actually share some really important information and a great discussion here today. I will introduce my panelists here in just a second, but I did want to just quickly share thank you for our Best of Staffing sponsors. Career Builders, our presenting sponsor. Indeed is a gold sponsor, and then new as of last week, Talent.com is also a sponsor of the Best of Staffing program. I'm going to be sharing some data from that program today, and then having our panelists really bring some of that data to life with their experiences and their stories. So why are we here? At the core level, I think we all have to understand why we're choosing to be a part of this journey and why we're stepping onto this pathway to be a part of this journey. And to me, this quote from Leela Jana really stands out. Talent is equally distributed. Opportunity is not. And so what we're going to be talking about today is the current state of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the staffing space. I'll give you some really interesting statistics as to the representation or lack thereof that we have. But then we'll talk really at a very pragmatic level about how to, as a leader of your firm, have a positive impact on diversity, equity, and inclusion, why you want to do that, and how to really make the biggest impact, as well as not just showing up for representation, but also making sure that the equity and the inclusion components of that really come home. So with that, I really want to introduce my panelists. And I'm going to start with the wonderful DeLibra Wesley. She is the Chief Operating Officer at the Delta Companies. She served as the agency's lead strategist, developing and implementing plans, policies, and programs that continue to make TDC a powerhouse in the staffing industry and within healthcare staffing specifically. She also leads TDC's Diversity Council, where she's focused on building and maintaining a culture of inclusion. She has numerous accolades, not the least of which that she has been recognized on the SIA Global Power 150 for the most influential women in the industry. But if you talk to her for long, you will know that she's most proud of being a mother to two amazing sons. So DeLibra, welcome, and give us a little bit of context as to where Delta is on this pathway and on this journey. Just a little context for the group.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. It's great to be here. At the Delta Companies, we started our Diversity Council. It's getting close to 2 years ago now, mainly because we noticed within our walls that women outnumbered men in the top sales. So the people that bring in the most and generate the most revenue in our organization, about 60% of that are women. Yet very few women are in leadership, and especially in the senior leadership level within the organization. So we have had some different initiatives that we're working through to roll out the welcome mat to women in leadership. And that's where we are today and the things that we're working on as an organization.
Great. Well, welcome, and thank you so much. I've had the pleasure of working closely with DeLibra for over a decade, and I'm just so thrilled to have your voice as a part of this conversation today. Speaking of people I've known for a really long time who've been doing a lot of super impactful work around diversity, equity, and inclusion well beyond the most recent year, I'm thrilled to also welcome Leslie Vickrey to our call today. She's a marketing expert. She is my go-to in the industry when I look at what's happening and what some of the key trends are around how best to communicate and market as a staffing firm trying to accelerate growth. She is also on the forefront of the technology industry. She's actually co-founded ARA, an organization that seeks to attract, retain, and advance women in technology. This is a group out of Chicago that's actually now more than 6,000 people strong. She's part of the Women Business Collaborative Staffing Leadership Council. She's a member of the ASA's Women in Leadership Council, on the board of directors for Chicago Innovation, and has been recognized in numerous accolades around her work as an entrepreneur, around her work around women's equity, and just is a fantastic voice. So Leslie, a little bit also the same question I gave to DeLibra, a little context on your view from a ClearEdge perspective, but also your view working with hundreds of staffing firms on these types of issues.
Sure. Thanks, Eric. And thank you for the introduction and having me here today. I guess this is a really interesting question for me personally as the founder and CEO of ClearEdge Marketing and co-founding a women's group. So it isn't really surprising that people often thought we were really diverse because we hired so many women. Yet, as we took a closer look, we realized we all look the same. We were white women between the ages of 35 and 50. And like a lot of companies, we recruited out of urgent needs, didn't build talent pipelines or have a workforce strategy. And we really kept turning to our own networks or, versus sourcing from different talent pools. So I will say sitting here that while I felt like we built, and we did build a really diverse company, helping a lot of women stay in the workforce who also wanted to be with their families, so have a career and raise their children at the same time. It's something we're actually working on to improve and have taken a really close look at where and how we find talent. So we'll talk about this a little later, but if our industry isn't diverse, we need to perhaps look outside of it. So we've been doing things like there's amazing Twitter profiles and conversations around Black women in marketing. If you look up #HireBlack in organizations such as BWise, which is Black Women in Science and Engineering, those are just a couple of examples. But having a strategy tied to business goals and clear success metrics, that's really critical to be intentional and make that happen and work for your company. So I know we'll dig deeper into the topic of building a talent pipeline through sourcing plans and where you find talent today. But I will say for us, it's a work in progress. So.
Yeah. I think this is one of the journeys where we'll never be done, right? We constantly are going to have to continue to evolve and address areas where we have weaknesses and identify those weaknesses as well. So I appreciate you joining the conversation. And to everybody that's listening, a couple of points. If you have questions for any of the panelists, myself included, please put them in the Q&A tab or put them in the chat function as well. And feel free to chat as we're going through here. So I'll ask a question. You can respond in the chat as a start of this. How would you rate your current staffing firm in terms of your progress towards diversity, equity, and inclusion? We'll just use a simple grading scheme since many of us have kids at home that are learning right now. Would you give yourselves an A, B, C, D, or F when it comes to the current grade that you would give your organization? And while you're doing that, I'm going to jump in and we're going to share the screen again here and talk through a little bit of the data just to kind of set this. So this is part of our best of staffing employee data to date. A lot of you actually have surveys in the field right now. This is not including that information, but I do think it's interesting. So far, we've received survey responses from just over 1,800 surveys. Across 50 different staffing firms. We expect those numbers to be about double by the time the end of the year comes, and we'll provide updates there again as well. Overall, the NPS is about a 54. For those not familiar with Net Promoter Score or NPS, that is simply asked, would you be willing to recommend this firm as a good place to work to a friend or family member? And that's on a 0 to 10 scale. Net Promoter Score is just percentage of people that give you a 9 or a 10, the promoters, minus the percentage of people that give you a 6 or lower, the detractors. And so that can range from -100 to +100. 54% is actually pretty good. And so this is a pretty good audience here. However, that still means so far we have 1 out of 10 employees that are detractors. And we see that satisfaction really differs significantly by both race and gender. So let's start by looking at representation. It's a really hard thing to do in the industry. So this is the first time where we actually have close to a census across 50 plus firms in the industry, over 1,800 responses. And what we see, if you compare us in the dark green to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, you can see we're significantly under-indexed on those who identify as Hispanic or Latino, and those who identify as Black or African American. Additionally, we look at by gender. What's interesting is we over-index towards females. This is where the foreboding music comes in, because there's more to that story that we're going to dive deeper into. We actually employ as an industry more females than the typical workforce would expect us to, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're doing everything to engage that audience and to really push that audience forward into management and leadership positions. And then we also have some really interesting data around those who identify as part of the LGBTQIA+ community, just a little bit under what is generally accepted to be those that identify across the nation that way. 4.5% do. Our industry employs about 3.8%. 6.1% single parent or guardian, only 1.7% veteran. Actually, the estimate for the workforce in the US is 7% veterans, so we're only at 1.7% in the industry based on the feedback that we have thus far. And so we wanted to start and just have a quick question, and I'll start, Leslie, with you. What surprises you in this data? And maybe nothing surprises you in the data, but what's kind of your reaction to some of that information?
So Eric, as you know, you and I have worked together on this for some time and more formally tracking data, including most recently a survey with the Women's Business Collaborative, which is in partnership actually with ClearlyRated, ASA, and other leading industry associations. So, I mean, the numbers tell the story. We clearly still have a lack of diversity. And what's interesting to see is the number of women compared to men, so many more women, yet a huge discrepancy between men and women in the C-suite and on board. So I guess I'm not surprised to see that number ratio. I wish that I would see it move more quickly to having more women in it. And I know that it's just a matter of time before that happens and having conversations like this, but nothing really surprised me from the data other than having so many more women and not in the C-suite or the boardroom. So just things we need to continue to work on to improve. DeLibra, did anything surprise you?
I agree. I think that I'm not surprised. I think that the data is amazing and important because it's what I've always felt in my gut was going on in the industry, and to see it coming from the people who work in this field day to day, and these are the numbers, this is the truth, is a little surprising. I would say the one thing that is a little surprising is the numbers on the veterans slide. I would have guessed that we employ more veterans than we do. So I think we need to pay a little bit more attention to that as well, because I mean, those individuals definitely deserve any opportunities that we can afford to give them. But the women and yeah, it's not a surprise. It's what I always thought.
Yeah. So in an effort to continue to not surprise, but to share important information, let's go back and share just a couple of other data points. And what I had told you was that I was going to share the BIPOC representation and what that looks like across level within the organization. And you can see here that when we look, 13% of the total staffing workforce identify as a person of color, and yet what we see here is within the director role, it's about half of what the overall representation is, and at the executive role, it gets even lower than that. So again, a big discrepancy when we look at where we should be compared to the overall workforce as an industry, but also in terms of how we're moving people and advancing people. Now, with those who identify as female, it's interesting as well, right? So 47% of the total workforce, there are areas within our industry where, again, we over-index dramatically. But when you look at that director level, when you look at that executive level, you can see we have a different outcome. And one of the things that really jumped out at me when I looked at the representation versus these two slides is just that it's a different problem, right? When we look at racial diversity, we have a top of funnel problem and a problem moving people into those leadership positions. When we look at gender, we have more of a middle of the funnel problem, right? We're getting people into the industry, and DeLibra, to your point, they're having success and they're having an outsized success, yet they're not getting the representation that they deserve at the director level and executive level. And so I wanted to, talk a little bit about this. And DeLibra, I'll start with you. What do you think is holding us back when you look at kind of how we recruit in this industry and the lack of representation? How can we bring these figures closer into alignment with what we would expect them to be?
So within the Delta companies, we are doing a great job at bringing women into our organization. And so I am challenging the senior leaders within our organization to begin to look at where the funnel is stopping and apply some of those same practices to the very top. So the opportunities that are being afforded to the women in the entry level positions are not, the numbers speak for themselves. It's not rising to the top. So what is the difference? Why is it that women don't feel as if they're qualified, or there's not an opportunity, or they don't quite understand the way to get to it? And how do we work towards blending that to where the process is streamlined no matter the level within the organization?
Yeah, I think that that's so key. And Leslie, similar question to you. You know, what's your sense of this? What have you seen work? Maybe you know, where do you see it fall down?
Sure. Thanks, Eric. Well, I do think it's ironic that we're in the recruitment industry. And if you think about it, we're helping our clients in a lot of cases with their workforce planning process. Yet many companies, and as I admitted earlier, we didn't either. It's something that we're really focused on doing, is really thinking about what is that planning process. So if you're planning your budgets and you know how much you're going to grow, how can you then budget for internal hires and even candidates to a certain degree? If you hire a certain number of a skill set or type of candidate year over year, you kind of know what you're looking for. So why does this matter? If you're hiring for sense of urgency because someone quit and you need to immediately backfill, more than likely it's about speed to fill, and diversity tends to take a back seat. However, if you keep a warm talent pipeline, and believe me, I know it isn't easy, but it can be a game changer, you won't be rushed to make a decision and you can focus on your ultimate hiring goals. The other thing is that data tells the story, like we said before. And if you're looking to diversify your workforce and the C-suite, it's going to be difficult within our industry. We don't have a diverse industry, so you may have to consider either going outside of your company and perhaps even the industry. So if we want to recruit within our own industry, we need to be very intentional about our diversity hiring, and you can't be diverse if the diverse candidates don't exist. I'll give one quick example. Signature Consultants, IT staffing company, wonderful company, headquartered out of Florida. They hired their first female executive from outside of their company, Lydia Wilson, and she's based in California. So a couple things there. They were flexible on location. They changed their recruiting strategy and they added diversity into their C-suite.
Yeah, I think it's so critical, and a lot of times what I'll hear in discussions when people are looking at trying to make good faith efforts forward, and oftentimes they're white male CEOs like myself, and their hearts are in the right place, but they don't see that, hey, I don't have anybody that is qualified for this position, is directly, if that is in fact true, that's directly related to the lack of bench that you've built up over that time. So, you know, first of all, I question whether or not that really is true. And second of all, we can't expect to have, you know, people of color that are ready for leadership roles if we're not only recruiting them into our organization, but also retaining them. And that brings up the next couple pieces that we wanted to talk about, because diversity, to check a box and say, look, we have this percentage that are women, we have this percentage that identify as Black, and this percentage that identify as Hispanic, is missing a big portion of this point, which is that we want to not only have the representation, we want to make sure that there is equity and inclusion so that people can bring their best selves to work. So let's look a little bit at what some of the data is on the retention. And I've seen in the chat a few questions come in. We will make this slide deck available. It is available to everybody who's attending, so don't worry about getting access to this. If you don't get access to it, just reach out to me directly and I'm happy to share it as well. So let's look at Net Promoter Score by race and gender. What we see is if you're a white male, it's up over 60%, which is considered exceptional, which is to say that the industry and your staffing firm is working for you. And what we see when we look at female, or we look at Hispanic, Black, or Asian respondents as a part of this, that number goes down dramatically. In fact, what we find is that if you're a female, statistically speaking, you're almost twice as likely to be a detractor, which is to say rate your organization a 6 or lower. And if you're Hispanic, Black, or Asian, that jumps to almost 3 times as likely to be a detractor as a part of that. And so we can go a little bit different. We ask a question around feeling that they have a sense of belonging at their firm. This is a really powerful component of equity and inclusion. And what we find is that only 22% of white males say that at any time they don't feel like they belong at their firm. And you can see dramatically higher for female, Hispanic, Black, and Asian. And then the last piece of data that I want to share before we jump back into the conversation is we asked the question of, does leadership show diversity is important through their actions? And you can answer always, sometimes, or never. And so this is the percentage who say that that's not always the case. And you can see if you're a white male, you say that about 18% that that's not always the case, but that you have a different perspective. If you're female, if you're Hispanic, if you're Black, or if you're Asian, that doesn't mean that if for all of my other white males on this side, that doesn't mean that we are okay with this. What it means is that we naturally are not going to see through the same lens as a person of color or as a woman in our organization. The only way to really understand if we truly are inclusive as an organization is to ask and to take action on that. So I want to turn back to our panelists, and with this as the backdrop, how do you approach the challenge of shifting the culture to make sure that if the work you're doing on attracting a diverse talent pool doesn't go to waste because they're more likely to churn out of your organization as well? And so DeLibra, maybe you can talk first a little bit about how you start to chip away at a culture that maybe isn't as diverse as the one that you want it to be.
So in my experience, I've seen the culture be homogenous, and I think I've seen the chats that we hire like us, and you tap someone on the shoulder that's your buddy and say, hey, this director position is opening up, or we tend to want our friends or the people that are like us to be a culture fit. And I challenge everyone to stop worrying so much about fitting into the culture. Your culture should be everyone with different perspectives is welcome, so that you can get a different view of problems and challenges, and not necessarily everyone looking at a situation the same. And then for us, what we've really worked on is we created this year after the George Floyd incident, the social unrest, we decided to create a subcommittee of our diversity council. The council is a group of leaders in the organization. The committee it's built of the employees in the organization that want to see change.
Yeah.
So what's been so great is having those people tell us, it's like you said, ask. They are the ones living it day in, day out. So they will tell you, and many people want to be a part of whatever the solution is. So they'll tell you the problems and how to fix it. All you got to do is really listen. And so you just have to be brave enough to really ask the questions and have a strong enough backbone to really fix it when they tell you what the problems are, and not get defensive about it. But that's been a huge change in our organization and a culture shift. There have been many things that we've done through this. Some of them easy wins, like low hanging fruit is what I call it. Like we weren't observing Martin Luther King Day. Now we are next year. Everyone's off. We also threw in a cultural day of awareness. So any employee, whatever they identify with, whatever is important to them, have an extra vacation day that they can use to take off for something that's not a company holiday. Those are little things, yeah. And people appreciate it so much. So we've chipped away at a lot of the little things, and we picked one or two really big ones to hone in to make a really big difference. But if your organization has a lot of things to work on, it's really great to ask the employees to tell you. And then from that, you can build a plan out of how to tackle it.
Yeah. Leslie, you have some really personal experiences with this, and we've talked about this a little bit as the three of us were prepping for this call. I'd love to have you share some of your experiences, as a female leader in the industry, and some of the things that you're seeing, good, bad, and otherwise.
Sure, thank you. And to DeLibra's point, if you haven't conducted an employee sentiment survey in a while, it is really important to know what's happening within your company. However, I'm going to share a personal story and focus more on a sense of belonging and being comfortable in your environment, not just from the company standpoint, but the industry and our community at large, because they all play a significant role. If you go to conferences, if you're going to events that vendors are hosting, whatever it may be, they all are intertwined into each other. So here's my story. A male friend asked me why I spend so much time posting on LinkedIn. So if you follow me on LinkedIn, I post a lot about helping women, mentoring women, sponsoring events about women. I host an Executive Women in Recruitment podcast. I co-founded a Women in Tech group, as Eric mentioned, called ARA, Attract, Retain, and Advance Women in Tech. 6,000 men and women strong, people strong. And I simply asked my friend, he said, why are you doing all of these things? And I said, have you ever had to think about whether or not you attend a work event and if you'll be safe or comfortable? Have you ever been told by an executive at an outing that you need to relax and have fun and to go sit on their lap? Or asked at an industry conference during an opening reception in front of several people, this is a C-suite CEO of a very large staffing company, directed just to you, if you were going to wear a bikini to the pool party after the opening reception. Or when expecting my son, I have one child, Grayson, have you ever nearly lost sales opportunities because you were pregnant? That really happened. Or asked, will you be shutting your company down because there's no way you can run a company and have a family? Of course he said no. And I said, listen, I'm someone's daughter. Would you want these things to happen to your daughter? And by the way, I'm not alone. I had a friend apply for a job and they literally changed the description so she didn't qualify. And as I was sharing this story, I've shared these stories a couple of times, and many other women step up and say the same exact thing. They have a laundry list of stories, and these are just a few examples. So I have to say, in that moment, at the conference reception, something incredible happened. Robin Mee, with Me Derby, who's on this conference here today, was standing next to me, and she jumped in and said something. She had a see it, say it moment. Talk about a culture shift. If you don't say something, you're saying it's okay to have that behavior. When talking about it later during a podcast together, Robin said that it takes a willingness to put yourself out there. And if you don't take these steps and surround yourself with a group of trusted people, it's incredibly difficult to find the confidence to speak up when it's needed most. We both hope, however, that the next generation of women in staffing will speak up in greater numbers and with greater ease, taking lessons learned from the women who came before them. And I have to tell you, I didn't have the confidence at the time. It took me many years to find my voice, to be able to speak up when situations happen. And we both agree it takes our strong male allies to also have our backs. So listen, it's astounding how many people leave the industries I love most, talent and technology, due to unfair treatment and uncomfortable work environments. As an industry, we have to support a zero tolerance policy, period.
You know, as much as I know that those stories are true and that there are other people that have those stories, it's still just is terrible to hear. And I really appreciate you sharing that. And what I will say is that, you know, for all of us, I think it can be hard. You know, Leslie and I talked a little bit about this beforehand, and you know, acknowledging that it can be a little bit paralyzing in the moment because there's this shock. I can't believe that usually he just said that. And one of the things that we kind of came around with is, look, if you're trying to decide in the moment whether or not you're going to be one of the people that does what Rob and me did and stands up and says something and puts a brick in the wall that stops that kind of behavior, you need to make that decision now. You can't make that decision in the point of time because it won't happen fast enough. And I would just challenge all of us, men and women on this call. There's a small percentage of us that are making these types of comments. There's a huge percentage of us that aren't correcting them, myself included. And I will tell you, your story hit home, and I will not stand by and listen to somebody else say something like that in the future. I think that's such an important thing for our industry. So let's step now into the next piece, which is advancement, which is another area that we have to do better. So let me just see if I can share the screen here one more time, and we will go. All right. Oops. Hold on. All right, there it is. So let's share a couple of data points here around advancement or the lack thereof. So we asked in the Best of Staffing survey, we asked whether or not they felt that there are opportunities for advancement in their current firm. And only 9% of males say that they don't think that there are opportunities for advancement in their current firm. You can see that number almost jumps to double when you look at females and when you look at the BIPOC community there as well as a part of that. Additionally, when we look at fairness of compensation, so the perception of being paid fairly compared to others who do similar work, 26% of males say that they don't feel like they're paid fairly. That jumps a little bit to 30% for the females, but it jumps really significantly when we look at our Hispanic, Black, and Asian populations within this industry. So again, it's not just around attraction. It's not just around retention. We've got to find ways to move these extremely capable people into the opportunities that allow them to influence from leadership positions in our space as well. So I'll start with DeLibra on this. What are some of the institutional barriers that we have to break down, and maybe some examples of you breaking that down at the Delta companies so that women and BIPOC employees have those opportunities to advance within the organizations that they're a part of?
I think this year has been a blessing in disguise within staffing, within our industry. It's been difficult to be a woman, especially a woman of color, but a woman and move up if you do want to have a family, or you take steps back. You take steps back in your career, in your compensation, because you have to take time off to take care of the baby, so then maybe your compensation changes, or you're overlooked for an opportunity to advance. Or I'm speaking in regards to needing a leave after you have your baby. But that's what I've witnessed and seen within my organization. And I know it happens to many of us within business, but especially here in staffing. But this year, we're in a unique position because our jobs can be done from home. We've made huge strides in that due to COVID. We're now realizing, okay, we can be more flexible. It's not going to be the end of the world if your 4-year-old runs by and needs a snack. We're all adjusting to this life, and business is carrying on. Things are still happening. We're able to do both. So my hope is that on the other side of this, that the leaders in this industry remember we can do it and are able to use some of this flexibility moving forward. Because if we can keep the same mindset, the example Leslie gave of the company realizing, okay, the perfect person wasn't even in the same state, but they hired that person because that was the right person. If we can keep that same mentality moving forward, it should open doors for more people who have different challenges. We just need to take the challenge, solve the challenge, and not keep the person from moving forward. I think that is the biggest thing. And then within our organization, we're working to change the way we promote individuals by giving them more at-bats and more opportunities in front of the executive leadership team, by giving them a chance to mentor reps and have more meetings and involvement and coaching from senior leaders, so we get to know people that we normally wouldn't talk to. So the idea with that is we're going to build the bench with a really good set of demographics. So many women who necessarily may necessarily never get this chance if we don't put them in that bench, so that they can mentor and get that exposure that they're not necessarily getting. And in addition, one other thing is posting the job. There's so many times that as a leader, you go, oh, I need a director. This person would be perfect. And you go and talk to that person and you just promote them. But you're not thinking about anyone else who may or may not be interested, or you just rule them out without even really talking to them. If you don't tap someone on the shoulder and just post your jobs where everyone within your organization can apply and feel like they easily have a chance to say, hey, I want this, and at least be considered, That's like a big, easy first step, because we rule people out sometimes without even giving them the chance to say, no, I don't want to do this, or not apply for it. So those are big institutional changes within the Delta companies.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that you have to be able to build that step ladder, and a big part of that step ladder is always going to be, who are the current executives comfortable with, and if they don't have any interaction with the extremely capable people, with diverse backgrounds, it's not going to change fundamentally. Leslie, same set of questions to you. What do you see as being the barriers that we have to overcome, and maybe some ways that you're seeing firms overcome barriers to advancement? I know you talked a little bit about flexibility. I'd love to hear your other thoughts there too.
Sure. Well, one of the things, and DeLibra, you brought this up too, is, tapping someone on the shoulder. I've interviewed a lot of women on our executive women in recruitment podcast, The Edge, and almost every executive has said when they have gone out, if they have a family on maternity leave, they made sure to tell their company to contact them if an opportunity comes up. So not to just exclude them or feel like, oh, I shouldn't contact them because they're out. No, they still want to grow in their career and their profession. You have to make sure you're not taking them off the table. So being really comfortable with having those conversations that may not always be comfortable in some cases. But one thing I've seen quite a bit is, if you think about it, companies, if you have a succession plan and you're rising people up within your own company and you get them to a level in different regions, let's say, so they've grown up, they started as a recruiter, sales rep, branch manager, now they're running a region, and the next logical step would be something within the C-suite. And a lot of people do stay at companies for a long time in our industry, 15, 20, 25 plus years. And then what'll happen is the company's headquarters may be in a state that RVP or someone isn't in, and now they're being expected to move to the headquarters, but their support system isn't there. So their support system being families or their kids in schools, whatever it may be, who are helping them be successful executives in the workplace, they're basically asking them to uproot that whole support system, leave that behind, to come to the company HQ, and they're missing out on that entire succession strategy. So if you think about it, a lot of women have a hard time being able to do that with their support system. So now you're losing this entire group of women, but you showed the stats, Eric. We have a lot of women in our industry. They make it up the ladder, but then they stop at that C-suite. So one thing I would say is that flexibility, and I can rattle off a lot of companies who have started to think of this differently. I already mentioned Signature, Advanced Group, Leo Sheridan's company, who you all know well. Their COO is based out of California, HQ's in Chicago. So, you can recruit for best talent and diverse talent and look outside if you're just willing to be flexible on where that comes from. And if you're growing them within your own company, these women travel, they're willing to go on the road, just don't uproot their systems, their support systems that help them be successful.
Yeah, that's a perfect transition into the last question that I want to hit with this group. And then we do have some time, and I see some great questions and commentary coming in the chat, which is fantastic. The question I have is around COVID-19, and Leslie, maybe I'll stay with you for this to start with. What's going to endure? What's going to last beyond COVID-19 in a positive way when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion?
I think definitely the hiring based on talent, not location. I mean, for us as a company, we have about 48 people on our team, and we've always had that mentality. So that hasn't really been an issue. I know, Robin, you run your company the same way. So just being flexible in the way that you hire talent and the ability to just navigate that situation. It's definitely proven that location-based concerns are fears rather than a reality, so that what's real and not real. So as an industry, we've always felt like we need to be in the office, we have to work together, all of these things. And I'm not saying make it a completely remote model, not whatsoever. You have to do what's right for your company. But what I have realized in this is every company is different. And they have also realized that they can be very successful metrics-wise and performance-wise remote, whereas in the past they felt like they couldn't be. So now again, those fears versus reality. And the one biggest issue I see is just making sure that with homeschooling and everything happening with COVID, that unfortunately for a lot of women, a career choice for many women, because they don't have any other option, is to become that homeschooling parent. So finding ways that we can also be flexible so we can make sure to retain and grow. If they have to go part-time and then come back full-time, whatever that is, have those open conversations. Otherwise, it's going to set us back. So see that as an opportunity. And then one last piece of advice, I had heard this on a recent Rick's webinar with Bullhorn, is if you did have to downsize your company during COVID, just to make sure you take into consideration how it also impacts diversity, equity, and inclusion. So when you're looking to ramp back up sourcing and hiring, which a lot of companies are doing right now, that's kind of top of mind as you're bringing people back.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you hit on that makes such a huge difference too, sitting in Portland, Oregon, which is not a particularly diverse city and has a long and problematic history when it comes to relations with our Black population specifically. You know, the ability to hire remotely where somebody has their community is a much stronger place, right? When we talk about that inclusion component of it, that inclusion is not just within the four theoretical walls of your company, it's within that broader community. And so we have to find ways to really help people thrive in their entire community as well as within their corporate community. And sometimes that's easier to do, to your point, without requiring that somebody uproot to come to your physical space. And I think that's when we go across the data, what we see is all of the groups that we're trying to impact positively and move in a positive direction to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion disproportionately are attracted to things like flexibility, remote work, and the things that they need. That candidly, one of the privileges of being a white male is oftentimes I don't require that in the same way that somebody else perhaps does. And so I think that's a really important distinction to look at, is that one of the best things you can do to increase diversity and increase the experiences of your diverse pool of talent internally today is just to extend a lot of the flexibility that you have granted during this time period, and to find the things that work that can allow that to go deeper, because you'll that will be more important to those with diverse backgrounds than they will with your white males. Mm-hmm. DeLibra, on the COVID-19, I'm fascinated with watching Delta and the accelerated pace that I'm seeing Delta kind of go through this, in the last 12 to 18 months. And what are some of the things that you think have the opportunity to outlive COVID here in a positive way?
I think whether we all wanted to or not, that applicants are more educated and smarter, and they're going to ask for different things. So if you're not thinking along these lines for your organization, it may at some point affect the talent that you're able to attract. I think that is sticking around. People are going to look for these things. Whether you maybe want to bury your head in the sand about the diversity and inclusion, people are looking for it. They're going to look on websites. They want to make sure they can see in senior leadership, this is someone like me. I think that this is an organization where I will feel included no matter my race, sexual orientation, age, whatever. We have to all know that this is here to stay. It's not going away. So making those adjustments now are going to be so important. On the other side of COVID, you're going to get outpaced if you're not ready. So I think that is the biggest thing. This whole mind shift in this country, I don't think this is going back. So the other thing I would caution is what we've seen in our organization is a bit of a struggle with the employees that we had, that we hired to do this job face-to-face. You come in, you meet with your director, you go on the road, you talk to clients face-to-face. Some of them struggle with this remote work. This isn't what I signed up for. I'm not good at this. Some of our leaders struggle with, how do I coach someone from a remote aspect? So those are different skill sets that we all have to grow. If this is not, it is not familiar to the Delta companies. We're learning as we go. So I challenge everyone, we need to make sure that as we're hiring talent, that we're questioning and understanding if this person's super organized, can handle these things, because you're not gonna have your boss standing over you telling you what to do. So are they gonna be able to pick up what they need remotely? And your leaders, will they have the skill set to be able to train and teach and transfer knowledge in a remote environment versus face-to-face? Because even on the other side of COVID, I know we'll go back to the office somewhat, but it will never be that we're there 5 days a week. It'll be 1 or 2 days a week. So it's just a different mindset. And at first we didn't realize it. And now we're starting to see, yeah, things are getting done, but it's not quite at the level for some of our reps that they were able to perform before. So how do we give them the tools that they need to succeed in a remote environment?
Yeah, I think that's and Leslie, you hit on it a little bit, that right now women specifically are giving back so many of the gains that they have made, because they're disproportionately the ones that are falling to the child care that has fallen through, or educating children who are remote learning right now. I do think when we look out 5+ years, that we have an opportunity to add in flexibility that ultimately makes it better for those that are juggling more things, which is disproportionately women, disproportionately single parents, disproportionately people of color. And so I think that there's a great long-term opportunity there. We have some questions in the chat. If you put a question in earlier and we weren't able to address it on the fly, please go ahead and put that back in. We've got about 9 minutes to take some questions. The first one that I think is a really interesting point is around intersectionality. And we've been talking primarily, the data I showed primarily was around the experiences of women in our industry and the experiences of people of color in our industry. But the point of intersectionality is a really key one. We showed some earlier data around the LGBTQIA+ group, those with disabilities. Part of the reason why I didn't go deeper on that, candidly, is just not having enough data when you go into some of these minority groups that are truly small to be able to sort of stand around that data, and partially because what we're talking about here really should be seen not just in terms of increasing diversity, equity, and inclusion for our Black employees or our Hispanic employees or our women employees. It really should be across the entirety of that organization, and ensuring to include and bring up people of all backgrounds as well. So let's go to a few of these questions that are in here. And the first one that I think comes up, you can also put them in the Q&A tab if you would like. This was a point made. DeLibra, I also like the iterative aspect of what you're trying to do with DEI. We're not going to get it perfectly right out of the gate. It's a lifelong effort working. And I just want to talk to both of you a little bit about a question that comes up, which is, what do you say to people that either feel like, oh my gosh, I'm so far behind, like I don't even really know where to start, or for maybe employees of firms that feel like, hey, my firm's trying, but I mean, we are light years behind where we should be. How do you manage that sense of urgency with the reality that some of this stuff does take time? And DeLibra, maybe I'll start with you around appropriate goal setting with that in mind.
So my mantra these days is it's on a spectrum. I tend to be on the end that is impatient. This should be faster. Why can't we make more ground? On the other end of the spectrum are people that may feel a little bit defensive. Why does this even matter? Is it going to take an opportunity away from me? The biggest thing that we can do is understand that it's never going to be a perfect science. This is more of an art, and we're going to have to just keep moving people into the middle and get somewhere in the middle with this. We at the Delta companies are very, very focused on education right now and just spending a lot of time educating people, making sure everyone feels comfortable with the fact that we all have biases. We're human. So let's just talk about it. We have these sessions called Courageous Conversations where people can call in and talk about anything that is concerning them regarding Black Lives Matter or just inclusion in the organization. And from that, I've learned so many things in that we have, you make lists, we have lists. And then, like I said, for us, it was so easy to grab the easy things so we can get a few wins and announce those out to the organization. Everyone knows that there's so much to do, but they can see that you're peppering away at it. Then on the top side of that with your leaders, you hone in on 1 or 2 big, really important initiatives and focus on that. And then you keep doing surveys, you keep questioning, you keep asking, and then you just retool it and just keep doing it over. It's gonna be an ongoing thing. And that part does get tiring sometimes. Self-admittedly, I get upset. I think, why is this needle needs to move faster. But we all have to understand that we're all human. It's not gonna be perfect. We have to forgive people who may say something that doesn't feel quite right, call them out for it, but explain and educate.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side of that, we have to make sure that if there are jerks in the organization that just are not going to get this figured out, that we're not allowing that type of behavior and people like that to stick around, because the employees that really care about it and that really are the people that are going to move your organization forward will leave you.
Yeah. Yeah. Leslie, what's your take on that? How should we be goal setting? How should we be breaking down some of these barriers?
Sure. And DeLibra, you actually semi-answered a question that John Reed McDonald had as well. And it's generational to a certain degree, the next generation with the women kind of moving up the ranks. We have so many in our industry. It is bound eventually to change, but we have to keep having these conversations and making that happen. So one thing is, it has to be embedded in your company. And someone actually asked earlier, how do you get the executives to be engaged and make sure that from the top down and bottom up, people are part of it? So something I had heard before was, if you call it a DEI program, that could come across as it being really short term. It's not just a program. It has to be deeply rooted or part of the company's foundation, or something that's really thought of as a business imperative. And it's not just about hiring. As we've talked about today, it's hiring. We've got to get more diverse candidates into our industry. It's also about advancement, but also that feeling of being comfortable. So you need to think about where that all fits and not bury it just in HR. It needs to be given a seat at the table to be able to have change. So certainly HR is a big component, but so is every other element of it. So one thing I would just pose you to ask is, ask someone, and this is from Corey Flournoy, who's the global head of DE&I from Groupon out of Chicago. He presents at a lot of our events. And I loved this. So what do you think DEI is from a person who isn't marginalized? So ask a person who isn't marginalized what they think DE&I is. If you don't have an empathetic community within your company, you will struggle. And if they don't understand it and it's not personal to them, then they will not engage to make the change. One quick example he gave was the city of Chicago, which is where I am. We're not right now, but where I live. I'm working remotely right now, being the murder capital of the US. He said there are over 75 communities, but 5 communities are the ones hurting the most on the murder front. So changing our statistics, 5 communities out of 75. So until you work on those communities impacted, it'll impact the entire city. My own mom's afraid to come in from Michigan to Chicago on the train because she's hearing so much about it in the news. If those communities, those 5 do well, we all do well. So again, think about that analogy for your own company around DEI and ask people who are not marginalized what they think it is. They have to be empathetic to help make change. It's at the core and the root of that foundation. And I'd start at the executive level.
Thank you. We're out of time. I could have doubled or even tripled this conversation. I think we still would have people highly engaged in the chat. And I know I certainly would be highly engaged. I just want to leave everybody with the last thought on this. first, I want to thank DeLibra. I want to thank Leslie for being a part of this conversation and talking about some things that are sometimes difficult to talk about in a way that I think really gives people a pathway forward when they want to make change. And then I just want to, again, challenge all of us on this call, myself included, to look at how we can impact change within our four walls, so to speak, but also look at the number of people that we influence hiring across this nation as an industry, and think about how we can lead this more equitable, more diverse, everybody succeeding opportunity as we move forward. And I implore you to really think about what else you can be doing to fan the flames of this really important progress externally as well as internally. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Shioma to wrap up the webinar.
Thank you, Eric. I just wanted to first say thank you to our panelists today and to Gregg, DeLibra, and Leslie. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon and sharing your expertise with our members. And to the members, thank you for taking time from your schedule to be with us this afternoon. I also want to thank ClearlyRated for sponsoring today's program. And you can view the program on demand within one business day at learn.americanstaffing.net. So that's our new home for all of our on-demand recordings and handouts and other resources. If you are ASA certified, this webinar does qualify for 1 CE hour. And if you're SHRM certified, it qualifies for 1 PDC. As always, we do value your feedback. Please stand by for a brief webinar survey.